new Pew poll out on the issue of the death penalty, and the trend is slowly but surely moving away from it. So let's take a look at the first chart here. Here you see that a smaller majority supports the death penalty. So it is still a majority. It's 56% of the American people support the death penalty. But look at how look at the trend or the pattern in that chart there. So for everybody listening on the live show, I'll describe it here. In 1935, when they started asking this question, 59% supported the death penalty, 38% opposed it. Stayed relatively steady, but there was a big drop-off in, I guess, the early 70s or the 60s. And for those of you who don't know, I think that's around the time there was a brief period in American history where the Supreme Court ruled that the death penalty was unconstitutional. So we didn't have it for a little bit. It wasn't long, but we didn't have it for a brief window there. And I think that during that time span, people just flipped their opinion. They're like, oh, that's what the law is now? Well, then I guess I'm on that side. So it was an anomaly in American history where the law changed or the interpretation of the Constitution changed, so people's attitudes changed towards it. It's a little weird, it's a little sheepish, but that's why you see that anomaly there where, in the 1960s or early 1970s, it was 47% who were against the death penalty, 42% were for it. But then it was reinstated, and you can see the trends there go completely in the other direction. Now, I don't know exactly why that is. I think what might have something to do with it is we have better information systems and more media coverage. So, with CNN existing and other 24-hour news networks and stuff like that, people are more aware of, there was a double homicide in this place, and there's a serial killer who was caught over there, and when people see stuff like that more, and there's more things for them to be afraid of, then they're more likely to be more conservative in their mindset on crime, and they're more likely to be for the death penalty. So it peaked out, I guess, in the early 90s when 78% of the American people were for the death penalty. 78% were for it. So, we really up there in the 90s. But then from there on in, man, the trends have been moving in the other direction. And it drops off until today, where you see 56% are in favor of the death penalty, 38% are against it. So for recent history, for modern American history, we're at a low point here, even though it is still a majority that support it. But let's take a look at the next chart here, because I think this is interesting as well, too. This shows the partisan gap on the issue of the death penalty. So 40% of Democrats favor the death penalty. So a majority are against it. A majority of Democrats are against it. Then you have independents, 57% favor. But then you have Republicans, 77% favor. So obviously it's most support for it amongst Republicans. And Pew also says the following, quote, a majority of respondents, both supporters and opponents, agree that it is not an effective method of deterring people for committing serious crimes. In addition, a majority concurs that there is a risk of executing an innocent person and that minorities are more likely than white people to receive the death penalty for committing the same crimes. At the same time, a majority of those surveyed agreed that when a crime as serious as murder is committed, the death penalty can be morally justified. Men are more likely than women to support the death penalty, and white people are more likely to do so than minorities. And they say, finally, across all 50 states, 32 states allow the death penalty, while 18 states and the District of Columbia do not. In 2014, there were 34 executions in the United States, with Missouri, Texas, and Florida conducting the most executions that year. So what I find really interesting about that is I agree with the majority on everything there. So they're just right now on some basic facts. So they're right about the fact that the death penalty is not a deterrent. That assumes that criminals are thinking rationally, right? If they think, I was going to kill him, but then I thought I might get the death penalty. No, criminals who are committing murder are not thinking things through. They're not rational in that way. And none of them are thinking, I'm going to get caught. They just do it. So it's not a deterrent, and studies have proven that. The American people are right. The American people are right that you do risk killing innocent people, and studies have shown that we have. And then also, yeah, there's a racial bias, and the American people now know that. And then here's another really interesting one, and again, this one I actually agree to, where they say, in theory, the death penalty can be morally justified. I agree with that too, and this is where I part with many progressives. Now understand, I'm against the death penalty in practice because we oftentimes get the wrong people. So you can't be for that system, because if you're for that system, what you're saying is, sometimes we should murder the wrong person. Every once in a while. How does that sound? You can't be in favor of that. It's just dumb to be in favor of that. So I'm not for it in practice, but in theory, so in other words, if we lived in a world where we had access to perfect information, then yeah, I'd be for it. Why? Because, if you know you're not getting the wrong people and, you have an Anders Breivik character who gunned down, 60 or 70 children at a camp because he was a Christian terrorist who thought that the evil liberals were taking over and the Muslims were taking over. Yeah, I look at that guy and I go, yep, if you kill him, you're just eliminating a problem. I don't think all life is equal. And I don't think, can anybody really say the life of Barack Obama is worth exactly the same as Anders Breivik? No, it's not. It's not. Anders Breivik has proven that he is worth less. He's a bad person. And some people, I think, are beyond rehabilitation. I have no interest in trying to rehabilitate that guy. Even if he says he's rehabilitated, I don't fucking believe him. And I think if you talk to a lot of psychological experts, they'll agree that some people are kind of beyond help. So, with that being the case, I think it's only realistic to say that in theory it does make sense to be for the death penalty, because sometimes you're just eliminating a problem and you're eliminating somebody who's just going to cost money or do further damage down the road, and that's a bad person. But, like I said, in practice is different than in theory. In practice, you can't do it because sometimes you're going to get the wrong people if you have a system doing it. So it's almost like you have to bite the bullet, if you will, which is a bad pun at this point in time, and just say, you know what, life in prison, got to do what you got to do, put him there, just so that we avoid any further problems with possibly executing innocent people. But overall, man, I guess you have to take some positives away from this because the trend is moving in the proper direction. But as we see from that chart there, you never know how it's going to go in the future, right? I mean, there may come a time in the future when Americans feel more like Europeans on this issue, where they're majority against the death penalty strongly. Hopefully we get to a point like that. Maybe we will, but who knows? Maybe the trend's going the other direction and we're back to a place where 70% favor it. All we can do is hope for the better result and try to argue for that better result.